Okay, I want to bring some attention to the banking system in the 19th century in the United States, and just a refresher course in case you don't understand how a bank works before we get to this national bank and the smaller banks. A bank works like this, and it's just common sense is there's deposits that come in from average people and money, and they deposit the money into the bank, and the money is stored there and kept safe. But the bank makes money on that money by doing what? By loaning out the money. And the loans are made to investments, but mainly it's into something, maybe start up new businesses, or they're buying land, or with the house. But back in the 19th century, the bank loaned out money to people that were starting businesses and moving to new lands and buying the new land. Primarily, this land is in the West. And when we say West in this class, we've been mainly talking about places like, let me give like Alabama is West, Mississippi, Louisiana, and then going up a little bit higher, Missouri, this is 1820s, Illinois, Indiana. That was the western states. Okay, so so that's the idea, and the bank makes money on the loan by charging interest. The depositor makes money by receiving interest from the bank, and the bank makes the difference is their profit. And the people over here make out because they've got a business started, and they have an investment in land. Now, typically, even in the United States today, the banks do the same thing, and most of their money that is made is on these loans, and people are buying houses. So the main thing you have to pay back this loan, right? Obviously, with interest, but if the price of the business or the price of the investment or the value of the land goes down, this loan is in trouble. And then the bank's in trouble. And if the bank's in trouble, then the depositors, the people who put the money in the bank, are in trouble. So go back to in history here, and back to what you've answered some questions, and we haven't really talked too much about this, but Alexander Hamilton had an idea of having, rather than just a whole bunch of independent small banks, that they would be a national bank. And his idea came into law in 1791, and then it expired in 1811. But then there was a second national bank after that, and it worked in John Quincy Adams' administration, and then after that in Jackson's administration in the presidencies. So the National Bank is most famous under Alexander Hamilton, but again in these administrations. And what was going on with the National Bank, that which is just like this, the basic example here: deposits, the loans, the investment, they pay back the loans, it's a business enterprise. What's a little different about the National Bank is the National Bank has special deposits. The money that comes from tariffs. So they don't just have average deposits, but they have tariff money, or revenue from taxes. And so these become a good portion of the deposits, and then the deposits are then loaned out. And so in the really a big time of loans by the National Bank was in 1819. Loans for enterprises and businesses and land purchases in the West again. And so what we have here is there's a whole lot of loans going out to Western lands, a lot more than originally, because they have a lot more deposits. And the reason why they have a lot more deposits is because they're getting tax money, tariff money, revenue. And so there was a lot of risky loans, and that came into a panic of 1819. It resulted in really a depression. It was called a Panic of 1819, based on something that you've seen in the textbook and you've heard about all your life. Really, is something called speculation. And speculation is a risky investment. Now, all investments have some form of risk, but this is risky in that people were borrowing money from banks, from the National Bank, and also small banks over here, National Bank and small bank loans, and they were buying land in the West. But it was speculative in that people were not moving to the West. They were just buying the land and then reselling the land at a higher price. And that works good as long as the value of the land goes up. But if you borrow money, let's say you borrowed $100 to buy some land, and you have to pay that loan back of $100 plus a little interest, but then the value of the land goes to 90. What would happen? Well, that's a problem you're going to lose. And so, at this point, do you sell the land at 90 and then pay back the loan, but you can't pay back all of the loan? So you're in a trouble here, and especially in the 1820s and 1830s, when the value of land went way down. So people borrowed $100 and owed $100, but they have valued their land only at 80, and that's as a result of being speculation, risky investment. Instead of trying to move into the land and live there and settle and be a pioneer, they were just buying just to resell the land. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just more risk. And when all this tariff money was being deposited into the banks felt like they had more money to loan, and so that resulted in a panic of 1819. There was another panic a little bit later. Let me just give another one here. Let's see if this works. I don't know if that worked. In 1830s is where the national banks were doing the same. However, Andrew Jackson grew to have a disagreement, a political and financial disagreements with the people who were running the bank, and also with political parties. And especially there's a man named Nicholas Biddle, and you should know that name. He was the president of the Bank of the United States. So it's called the Bank of the U.S., or the National Bank, as opposed to small independent banks. And Andrew Jackson did something to kind of sabotage the Bank of the United States, the National Bank. And what he did was he defunded. He changed the tariff regime, and he changed the rules that no longer would those tariffs and the national taxes go into the Bank of the United States. So basically, the Bank of U.S. Defunded and went broke, or just went out of money, and so it stopped making all those loans. And so the smaller banks, that we talked about up here, started making the big loans. Now there's a difference between small banks and the National Bank, in that one was the tariff. The National Bank had the tariffs as deposits. The smaller banks did get some of that money, but there were so many small banks, and they had a practice that instead of loaning out money, they loaned out paper money. Instead of money backed by gold and silver, which the National Bank primarily did, the smaller banks loaned out money, paper money, like we do today, ironically. And that is not backed by real gold and silver, and so it was even more risky. Not only was the loan itself more risky, but the paper money itself was being risky practice. And so as this Western land was being bought with the paper money on very easy terms. So something to, let me go back to probably something you could jot down here is the National Bank had very, we call it in quote, tight credit or tight lending. And know what that means. That means that they will not issue credit or issue these loans very easily. It's tight. They want to make sure that you're not going to waste the money. The small banks have a practice that's called easy credit, and that's the way it is today, and the same terminology is it's either easy lending, easy credit, or tight credit. Small banks historically have easy credit, and the National Bank, the Bank of the United States, is tight credit. And that's something to remember. And tied to that was that idea that the credit, it has to be backed by gold. Oops. Okay, let's see here. Gold. Getting real slow here. Gold and silver coins, and easy credit from the small banks is paper money. Something happens when you go slow here. So paper loans, gold and silver loans, paper loans. Okay, that's another big difference between small banks and the larger bank of the United States. So in the 1830s, the Bank of the United States was defunded by Andrew Jackson and stopped making all the main loans, and the main loans went to the smaller banks. And those banks started loaning so much and most of it was going to speculation again. Speculation meaning risky land purchases. Well, eventually the price of land goes so high because people are buying so much. When there's so much buyers, the land price will go up. But and Andrew Jackson ironically got involved with this side of the banking system as well, and he put restrictions on those small banks, fearing there was going to be a problem. They were driving the price of land so high that the average person who wants to go live in the West, to be a pioneer and settle, could not afford it. Only people like big banks and big businesses and people rich in the East, Northeast, were buying the land and reselling them to each other in many cases. And no one was actually going to live on these speculative ventures. So Andrew Jackson got involved to try to curb this speculation, and what he did was he made a law that went through Congress that said in order to buy land in the West, you had to use gold and silver backed money. In other words, you basically had to use silver or gold coins. And that proposal, that bill, and that eventual law was called Specie Circular. Today, you should know the word here, specie. It simply means a form of currency, form of money, and circular means circular. It's like a circle. It means it's got to be a coin format. The money does, and so gold and silver back in those times were in coins, and so in some ways that was a prudent thing to do to make sure, but to make sure that the land purchases were in gold and silver, and real money, in other words. However, it was kind of too late, and it came on too quickly, and so what happened to the land prices that had gone sky high now dropped because people could not get loans from the small banks with gold and silver because the small banks did not have gold and silver. If you can follow this, if you can't follow this, kind of pause it, rewind, get to your notes. It's not real complicated. If you go back to the top, like how do banks make money in the first place? They get deposits and they loan out the money, but they need to be paid back. There's an old financial banking proverb that says if you owe the bank $1,000, if you owe the bank $1,000, you have a problem. You have a small problem. And if you owe them a little more thousands of dollars, you have a bigger problem. But if you owe the bank $1 million, the bank has a problem. And that's what happened. The banks were making these loans, and then they stopped making the loans, and the value of the lands went down, so people tried to sell them very quickly, and the value of the land dropped even more, and they could not pay the banks back. And eventually this ends up being, in 1837, the Panic of 1837. In other words,